welcome to this video tutorial. Today we're going to have a look at an introduction to parameters. Parameters allow functions to share data. This is a very powerful concept in computer programming. Hopefully you've already managed to get the starter code into your IDE and you've opened the worksheet. Also, you understand the scenario and you run the code and you've started or completed the code analysis section. So the main program says we call the welcome function, just 2 lines of code there, and then we call the setName function. So the setName function gets the player's name or the character's name, and it makes it a global variable because the encounter function, another function, also wants to use that data in that variable. So that's why we made it global there. And then 5 times, this is iteration, we are calling the encounter function. So we repeat this 5 times. We generate an attack number, just a random number between 1 and 6, and we make it global because we want to use that variable inside the encounter function as well. We generate a defense number, make it global because we need to use that in the encounter function, and then we analyze the results of those random numbers and determine who won the encounter. And we're doing this 5 times. Now, what the worksheet is suggesting is, what if we want to, at the moment, the roll attack function generates a number between 1 and 6. But what if we want to kind of play with that a little bit? For example, if I call the roll attack function with a value of 10, then the roll attack function will generate a number between 1 and 10. Okay? How can we make this happen? So let's just put that 10 in there. And we're going to put, let's say, roll defense is a different number. How can I get the roll attack function to grab this data and use the data in the function? So when I call the function, which is up here, I send it some data. Ding! What we're going to do is create a little variable between the round brackets. This variable is going to grab that data. So 10 goes into here, and then we can use that variable inside the function. Okay? Now this variable here, x, it isn't really a global variable, and it's not really a local variable. It's just a temporary variable which stores data when we call the function. So 10 goes into that variable there. This kind of variable is known as a parameter. Okay, so let's do the same thing with the roll defense function. What should I call this parameter? Can I call it x? Again, can I use the same variable name? Yes, you can do that, no problem. Okay, just call it whatever you want to call it. It's a different function, they're not related, so there's no confusion. Okay, so let's run the program and see if this works. So the character name is Jack. Yay! Jack attacks with a strength of 1, the goblin defends with a strength of 12. Jack attacks with a strength of 10. So you can see the numbers now are beyond the 1 and the 6. The goblin defends with a strength of 14. The goblin defends with a strength of 14. I tell you what, the goblin has got a bit of an advantage here, doesn't he? Because the goblin is using the defense variable, and the defense variable is anything between 1 and 20. So the goblin has a little bit of an advantage in this situation. Okay? But beyond that, does that concept make sense? When we call a function, we send it some data. The function grabs that data in its parameter, and then it can start to use the data inside the function definition. Okay, Now x isn't maybe the best name for this parameter. I'll change that to defense num. And let's just update that. And let's also do that. I'm going to call this attack num. Just to make my code a little bit more readable. Okay. Kind of get a feeling for what this variable, this parameter is doing. Okay. Now, if you work your way through the worksheet, it also talks about what if we don't always want to encounter a goblin? Every time we call the encounter function, a goblin appears. But what if we want to do this? What if sometimes we want to encounter a witch? And the next time we encounter something, we want to encounter a goblin. And the next time we call the encounter function, we encounter a ghost, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just going to remove the for loop for a moment. We'll come back to that before the end of this video. I'm just going to give you another idea for this. But in the main function, we call the encounter function 3 times. The first time we call the encounter function, we encounter a witch. The next time we encounter we call the encounter function, we encounter a goblin, etc. Okay? So let's take advantage of our knowledge of parameters. We're sending some data into the encounter function. So let's go up to the encounter function. And let's create a parameter. It's just like a variable. I'm going to call this enemy. Okay? So now, in my first print statement, I'm going to say enemy appears. Don't forget to use the curly brackets, because this is a variable. Okay? And as we go through the program, we're going to have to get rid of that goblin and change that to enemy. Right? Because we're now using that instead of always having a goblin. So if we run this program, let's see if it works. We're going to do 3 encounters this time. Good luck, Jack. So first we encountered a witch, then we encountered a goblin, and then we encountered a ghost. Okay? So parameters are helping our functions to share data. In the main function, we've got this data witch, and we're sending that data to the encounter function. The encounter function grabs it in its parameter and then starts to process it as it completes its own purpose. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to cover today before I finish this tutorial is, let's just go back to the original for loop. Do you remember that the value of I changes as we go through the for loop? The first value of I is 0, and the for loop code's run. Then I becomes 1, then I becomes 2, then I becomes 3, then I becomes 4, and that's the end of the for loop. So these are the 5 values of I as we run the for loop code. So we can use the value of I. If I is the same as 0, then we're going to encounter a witch. Now, if I is the same as 1, we're going to, let's just bring up some space here. We're going to encounter a ghost. Now, if I is the same as 2, we're going to encounter a goblin. Now, if I is the same as 3, we're going to encounter, let's say, an angry bear. And if I is not 0, and it's not 1, and it's not 2, and it's not 3, it just means it must be 4. So let's just do a final else statement. Let's encounter a goblin again. Doesn't really matter. We're just messing around with an idea. So we can use the value of I in a for loop to help us do some different fun things. Okay? So see if you can get your program working, and then let's move on to the extension activities.